All right, welcome to the second installment in the project management guide. So this one, we're finally going to start getting into some of the different methodologies or strategies of project management. Today, we're going to compare two main ones that are pretty big in the tech world right now. One is kind of falling off and going away, but it's still there. Then we have another one that is definitely dominating, and I'm seeing all over the place, especially if you work remote. A lot of remote jobs tend to operate with this specific methodology. So we're going to focus on waterfall and agile today. So starting off with waterfall, the waterfall methodology is pretty straightforward. It's a type of process where you have a start, you have a finish, you have however many steps in between, and you don't move on to the next phase until the previous phase has been greenlit as accomplished, right? And the general idea with the waterfall methodology is that there's no backstepping. You can't go back when something else arises. That's the general idea, which is why you have, let's say, a 5-step process. You get to step two, you get permission to move forward to step three. You're not supposed to go back to step two. That's what makes it pretty unattractive to many companies these days. It's considered a more traditional approach to project management. I don't know if it's necessarily the oldest methodology, but it is considered the traditional approach or a traditional approach. So it's probably more, a little bit older than some of the other methodologies we'll cover down the line in the project guide, the project management guide. The waterfall methodology was leading to too many deficiencies and just complaints all around. Just wasn't efficient. It wasn't as good as it could have been, which is what led to the creation of this other methodology that we'll cover in a little bit of agile and why it's kind of championing the job market in the tech world right now. The waterfall methodology, granted, every project is different, but there are 6 general steps that are part of this methodology that you're supposed to move through in a straight line without backing up to the previous phases. The first phase is the requirements phase. Requirements is when you're gathering like the different guidelines or requirements that the project is supposed to end up with down the line upon completion from the customers and different stakeholders that will be funding and putting their word in for this project, right? Just to sum it up, we'll go through these very quickly. Next is design. This goes back to the architect solution slash enterprise architect topic that I spoke about before, where the architects, and this goes for traditional architecture as well with houses and different buildings, that the architects are responsible for designing the building and whatever facility, or even in this case, the product and applications and things that will be used, like different components that will be used to back that service. It's the same thing. We're responsible for designing it, basically coming up with a blueprint, but we're not responsible for actually building out the final product. This is actually the fourth step, which is construction, which is pretty straightforward, both literally with houses and buildings, typical architecture and those type of things, as well as tech, is when you pass that blueprint and those designs off to the architects, or rather to the engineers, whether, developers and engineers who will actually build out this vision until they hit a wall, whether it's budgetary or like the materials used to build this final product. And then they'll push back against the architect and say, hey, we have a problem here. We may have to plan differently. We may have to change a few details up to make this actually work and to make this as cost efficient as the customer wants. Otherwise, it may take longer, or we're just going to run up more of a bill than they want, right? If anything, these 2 steps together, design and construction, are probably the main reason why the waterfall methodology is not as effective, because naturally, once you hit the construction part and people start building things out and they find that there's a discrepancy and they have to push back against the team that designed the blueprints, that's a natural back and forth process. But with waterfall, you're not supposed to go back to previous phases. So that's usually, or at least, from a theoretical standpoint, that's what makes waterfall pretty inefficient. But we won't linger on that. Let's move on to step 5, which is testing, which again is pretty self-explanatory, especially if you're dealing with tech. You're testing out what you have built, whether applications, whether you're dealing with a physical phone or like a toy, whatever product that you've physically built or have whatever software you've developed, you're testing out its functionality to make sure that the different components of it run smoothly. The materials or the different components on the back end in terms of networking components, load balancers, servers, and whatnot are working properly, and that it can handle the different like levels of stress that it's supposed to attract when it comes to, let's say, scaling it up when network traffic goes up, scaling it down when it goes down, and that type of thing, right? The last one is deployment and maintenance. Deployment is just like military deployment is when you get sent out, you get shipped out. Basically, you're introduced to the general public, you're introduced to the market, everyone knows you're there, and some people will want to buy you, test it out, see what it's like. Other people may not, they'll probably pick it up, put it right back down. Some, they just don't want anything to do with it pretty much out the gate. So, it's up to the different consumers in the market, but nonetheless, deployment is when you put it out there. And the maintenance half is when you pretty much maintain it. Maintenance, maintain. It's when you do what you need to do to keep things going, when new vulnerabilities are made known to you, when vulnerabilities come to your attention, whether they're vulnerabilities that will lead to the application to get hacked into, whether they're vulnerabilities like a literal house, like someone can break in here because this isn't secure, or whether they are like with social media platforms, and many of them these days are pretty obsessed with like the cameras and photos, videos, stories, reels, all these different things. If YouTube, for example, actually introduced their YouTube Shorts functionality, I think last year, 2023, which was pretty new, if not 2022. Hopefully I'm not getting that wrong. But still, YouTube Shorts is a very new concept for YouTube once it blew up on different platforms. So let's say when it released in its beta phase, they tested it out, they deployed it, and now they're coming across different bugs and things. Same thing with Apple, or same thing with certain tech companies. Once they release their phones and other gadgets to the market and people buy them right away, 9 times out of 10, there's always a bug. People always complain about it. These type of news, this type of feedback gets back to the ones that created and deployed the product. And now they have different things that they can fix to maintain it and make sure it works over a long period of time and basically stays a moneymaker, right? All right, guys. So I just wanted to clear something up real quick, because there's going to be a little bit of confusion when it comes to the different steps of the waterfall methodology. Of course, it's like everything in tech. There's multiple just names and versions of the same thing, and this can throw people off, especially when it comes to like acronyms and things like that. That's a whole monster in itself. So I said this is going to be a 6-step process. Depending on who you ask, who you talk to, and where you look online, this will actually be a 5-step process. So let me at least give you the steps that I intended to follow for the sake of this video, and then we'll move on from here. So first, this is the requirements gathering. This may be called, depending on where you look, it may be requirements. This may be called the analysis phase or the requirements analysis phase, but they're the same thing. You're gathering all the requirements of the project and going over them so that you know what your customer and stakeholders are requesting of you. Number 2 is design. This may also be called system design, which specifies different hardware and different components that you'll need to use, including programming languages and like servers and things like that. It goes over all those different parts of the system that you'll need, basically the components and tools that you'll need and resources you need to get the job done. That has subcategories in itself, but we're not going to go into those steps. Third is implementation. We pretty much got this point right. This is where you build it out. I did throw it off by saying this is the construction phase. I took the actual like construction term, like building houses and things. I applied that, but this is implementation. Then you have testing, which is self-explanatory. You finish testing your prototype of whatever the finished product should be. Now you're testing it. And then depending on where you look, some of these steps will be mixed together into one big step. And then some other platforms and other people will split the steps. So this last step is one of those. This is deployment and maintenance. Now, wherever you go, some will have deployment and maintenance in separate steps. Others will have them as one big step. But they're the same thing. Deployment, you take whatever software or hardware product that you've created and you put it out into the world. And then maintenance is when you get those bugs and you get those complaints whenever, like, hey, something's going wrong with my camera, something's going wrong with my toys, not making the sound it's supposed to, or this broke off easily and this and that. Now you can backtrack and make those corrections to fix those bugs and do whatever recalls you need to do. Make those corrections, and then you can put it back out into the market better than it was before. So hopefully that was helpful. Before we get back into the rest of the video, just a quick recap before we get back to the regular thing. You have requirements gathering or requirements analysis, system design, implementation, testing, deployment, and maintenance. You can consider this a 5-step process or a 6-step process, depending on who you ask. All right, back to a regular video. So how's Waterfall different than Agile? There's a few different differences, but Agile, the main difference between Agile and Waterfall is that unlike Waterfall, where once you proceed to the next phase, you can't go back, Agile allows you to kind of go around and around and around. It's a non-linear approach. That's why it's not traditional. It's not linear. Once you get the permission and get the green light to move forward to the next phase, and then you have to push back to make adjustments, you're able to do that, and that allows more bases to be covered and for the customer to be satisfied with the finished product, as well as make it, I guess you could say, somewhat easier on the team, the project team that's working on these projects, because now they won't, an additional stressor that may not be as introduced is the fact that they have to push back against a different team or someone on the team when it came to, let's say, again, say design versus construction, soft or engineers slash developers versus architects, and vice versa. Customers, they should be aware that this is how this system will work. So if you need to push back and make adjustments to the budget, if you need to make adjustments to the timeline, those type of details, you can push that to the customer or customers and different stakeholders that are part of the project team, whose voices basically give the green light for certain things to be allowed and for certain things to be denied. You'll be able to have that conversation with them, and it's a little less stressful and not as bad to handle because they understand the nature in which this project will be constructed. Part of those meetings is something called ad hoc. And ad hoc is a term that's not unique to just tech. It's pretty much a general term, but we tend to use it a lot in the tech world. I think the most I've ever heard it mostly is cybersecurity, because of how fast-paced cybersecurity can be and how much pushback you can get, because again, you're handling pretty important data. But in general, ad hoc, like if you have an ad hoc meeting or an ad hoc phone call, it simply means as needed. Ad hoc means as needed. The general gist of it is we didn't plan for this meeting, we didn't plan for this conversation, but we need to have it nonetheless. So if you have like a quick half hour, can we connect right before lunch, right after lunch, and go over some details that I just came across, that type of thing. It basically just pops up. It wasn't planned. That's the general idea with ad hoc, right? So that's the benefit with Agile, because Agile is an ad hoc environment. Again, you'll do some pushing and pulling with different teams or members of the team and stakeholders and the customer and whatnot. So Agile being ad hoc friendly is very important because Waterfall is very linear, very rigid, and therefore there's not a lot of room for additional conversation when there wasn't, planned to be any. Versus Agile, that's pretty much the name of the game, but it allows people to stay up to date. They get the most updated information. They get the most updated data when they do additional research. They have the most updated numbers when it comes to budgets. How much can they spend? How much should they not spend? They have, updated guidelines when it comes to manpower. How many people should they, have on their team in general? How many people should be directed towards this? How many people should be directed towards this? This can also affect work hours and those type of details. So that's what makes Agile pretty useful versus Waterfall, which is pretty rigid and stiff. Agile is a lot more flexible and you can go around and around with it. Now, at this point, we're going to branch off into the different sub methodologies or subcategories of Agile, because Agile, like project management, is already an umbrella in itself. Then you have Waterfall versus Agile, and even Agile is an umbrella under itself. So now you have different sub methodologies that are like Scrum, Lean, I believe Six Sigma's under there as well. Kanban's another one that I've heard of, but I haven't seen in practice, honestly, at all yet. I don't know where, but I'm sure somewhere it's being used, but I haven't heard it, right? Or rather, I haven't seen it. So those are some other subcategories that from this point on, we're going to dive further into. So we're pretty much going to dive further into the Agile side of things more than the other methodologies that may be more useful in different industries that aren't tech related, but we'll still cover those anyway. But yeah, hope this information was helpful, guys. This is the second installment of the Project Management Guide. If you have any feedback for me, go ahead and throw that in the comment section below for me. I appreciate you guys being here with me again. I'll see you guys next time. Later.